Hello there, I'm Pastor Sarah, and this is a video for the St. Luke second year confirmation students. So if you're not a second year confirmation student at St. Luke, you are still invited to watch this video. I realize that it's on our YouTube channel, but just take note of who the video is intended for. So in April, we would have started our journey through the New Testament. And this is a lesson that's going to be a little intro to the New Testament and then a lesson on parables for today. So to review, some of this is going to be review for you. Some of it might be new information, but it will get us all on the same page. Also, Madeline is awake and playing in the living room, so you will hear her, and occasionally I will be looking over to make sure that all is well with my toddler. So bear with me. So to review, the New Testament begins with 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And each tell the story of Jesus' life and ministry in their own way. Now, Mark is probably the oldest gospel, even though we have it second in the New Testament, and it is the shortest gospel. It is a really quick read. It jumps from scene to scene. And so if you're like, oh, I want to read a gospel from start to finish, which one's the easiest to do that with? I would say it's probably Mark because it's the shortest. Then we have the Gospel of Matthew, which is the first book of the New Testament. And Matthew is written for a Jewish audience, which is probably why we put it first, because it really draws on the Hebrew scripture or the Old Testament to talk about who Jesus is and what his mission is. And so that way, it's a really good bridge from the Old Testament or the First Testament to the New Testament. The Gospel of Luke is the third gospel, and it is also my personal favorite. It's pretty much a musical with people bursting into song all the time, like Zechariah and Mary. And only the Gospels of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke share the birth story of Jesus. And it's in the Gospel of Luke that this is more drawn out and given lots of little details. So when you think about the birth story of Jesus, you're most likely thinking about the Gospel of Luke. This Gospel also has a strong emphasis on the economic impact of being a follower of Jesus. So there's a lot of attention paid to wealth, stewardship. That means how we use what God has given us, and then the relationship between rich and poor. So money is a recurring theme in the Gospel of Luke, comes back many times. The Gospel of John is really different than the other ones. It contains many stories that are unique to the Gospel of John, and it's very poetic. There are times right from the beginning of the opening, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. There's times where it reads like poetry, more so than the other Gospels do. Also in John's Gospel, Jesus talks a lot. So every time there's a miracle, there's also this long discourse about what that miracle means. So that's how the New Testament begins, with 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then there's the book of Acts, which has the same author as the Gospel of Luke. It's kind of a continuation. It's a continuation of the gospel story, but instead of following Jesus, because it takes place after the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus, it follows the life of the early church. So it follows how the first disciples shared the gospel and brought the good news to different people in different places, as Jesus had told them to do. The rest of the New Testament is a collection of letters or epistles. Epistles is just another way of saying letters. These are the letters that were sent to the first congregations, the first communities of believers gathered together. And these letters were meant to be read out loud to the whole community. Fewer people were able to read back then. So you'd have one person read the letter to everyone. And many of these letters were written by Paul, who is introduced in the book of Acts. He persecuted Christians until he became one himself after an exciting encounter with Jesus. And some of these letters are even older than the Gospels. So just because it appears in a certain order for us now, doesn't mean that they were written in that order. So the letters cover all sorts of topics. They try to make sense of the death and resurrection of Jesus. They try to settle the debates that people are having. Bless you. And mostly they try to teach the new communities of believers how to live in community together and how to remain faithful even in really tough circumstances. So that's an overview of what the New Testament contains: 4 Gospels, the book of Acts, and then many letters. And in our next lesson that you'll receive from me, we'll probably look at one of the letters more in depth. So that's something to look forward to. Okay, so for today's lesson, we're going to talk more about parables. Parables are found in all 4 Gospels, and parables are just one of the ways that Jesus teaches the disciples and the crowds that are around him all the time. Parables are stories that teach. So I think the most important reason that Jesus uses parables to teach is that it's easier to remember a story than a direct lesson. I know for me, I have a hard time remembering the 10 Commandments in the right order. Memorizing a list is just not something that comes naturally to me. But I can retell many of the parable stories because there's something about a story that just sticks in my mind better. That's the kind of learner I am, but maybe you're a little bit different. A story also lets us draw the conclusion ourselves. And I think because of that, because it requires us to do a little bit more work on our end, it's also something that we'll remember better and it will stick with us longer. Now, parables are a bit like fables. Do you remember fables from when you were a kid? They're kind of short, simple stories that have a moral at the end. So a classic one is The Tortoise and the Hare. And in that case, the moral at the end is slow and steady wins the race. Now, parables are a bit like that. We do learn moral lessons from them. Like when we read the story of the Good Samaritan, a man who is hurt and he's waiting for help. And then the people we expect to help him don't stop. But the one who is least likely to help him is the one who takes the time to stop and to help. And so we learn in that parable that the one who shows kindness is the true neighbor. But parables are also very different than fables because not only do they teach a lesson, and sometimes that's clearer or less clear, but they always reveal something about the character of God and the nature of God's kingdom. So that's what makes them unique, is that feature. God's kingdom is the life that's possible when we let God lead us, when we love others the way that God loves us. So think about the story about the prodigal son. In this story, one brother asks for his inheritance early, before his father dies. And then he spends it all, and he comes home ready to be a servant in his father's house, ashamed of what he has done. The father welcomes him back with forgiveness and with love. And then he goes one step further and he throws a big party for his son who has returned, which the other brother is not happy about, by the way. So this is a story, not just a lesson about forgiving others. So that is definitely a part of it. This is also a story about God's extravagant love for us. Love that doesn't make any sense at all. Love that will always welcome us back, no matter what we've done. Now, not all parables are super straightforward, and some even teach more than one lesson. So if you've ever read one that doesn't make any sense at all to you, don't worry, because it probably doesn't make much sense to the adults in your life either. Sometimes parables are meant to confuse us a little bit. That way we have to stop and linger over them. And sometimes it just means pausing for a few minutes. It could mean a few years. It could mean wrestling with a certain story our whole lives. You might even find that you learn something new from a parable every time you read it, or that it means something different to you at different points in your life. So for the rest of this lesson, I would like you to do 3 things. First, I would love for you to watch a video on parables from the Bible Project. And I will link to that video in the description box below. I think I have the ability to do that, but I'll also send the link along with this lesson in an email to your parents, so they should be able to help you find it. You can also just search YouTube for Parables Bible Project, and it should be the first thing that pops up. So this video is about 5 minutes long, but it is an excellent overview. It covers a handful of parables, and it gives additional reasons for why parables were so important in Jesus's teaching. And the Bible Project is a great resource, by the way. So if you ever hear something in worship or during Sunday school that you want to learn a little bit more about, I highly recommend these videos from Bible Project. They have one for every book of the Bible and for a variety of topics. So yeah, they're a great resource. And I think adults can learn from them too. I often learn something from the videos when I watch them. Okay, so that's number 1. Watch that YouTube video from Bible Project about parables. Number 2, I would like you to read the parable of the day laborers on your own or with your family. So that is found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. And I will also put a reminder for that in the description below and in the email. So read that parable, and this is one of those slightly tricky parables. At first you might think, what? That's not fair. But then if you think about it again through the lens of faith, from the perspective of what does this parable say about God and about the kingdom of heaven, then maybe it says something a little bit different. So that's the one I'm going to encourage you to read. But you can feel free to read some other parables as well. And then lastly, I think this one is the most fun. I want you to write your own parable. Yep. And I want you to have fun with this. I want you to write a story that reveals something about God. Now, it can be straightforward. It could be a little trickier. You don't need to write anything to explain the story's lesson or purpose. And there's no length requirement for this. But I would like you to send me your parable after you've written it so that I know you've completed the lesson. And I will never share your written work without your permission, if that's something you're self-conscious about. So I'm the only person that will read this unless I ask you for permission to share it. So write your own parable. I think it's a fun exercise, and it helps you think through the different parts of a parable and the kind of structure and things like that. So that's all. That is my first attempt at an online lesson. I'm still learning, and I don't know what is a good length for these sorts of things. I hope this is just the right amount to pique your curiosity and to learn something new and to have some fun with parables, which I think are really fun, but I'm a pastor and I think all of this is really fun. So I know that you are balancing a lot right now with your online schooling or homeschooling. So there's no rush to complete this lesson, but so we don't lose track, let's just say, please return your parable to me sometime during the month of May. And I really look forward to reading them. There was one lesson prior to this that was sent out by Pastor Danny. If you haven't sent that one back yet, either me or him, please do so when you have the time. And if you need me to resend that to you, just let me know and I will get that lesson out to you. And then the next confirmation lesson, I hope to send out to you by the end of May, because we would have met like the 4th Saturday of May. So I'm going to send the makeup lesson for May towards the end of May. All right, well, I think that's all I have to say for this video. I hope you find the rest of the pieces of this lesson engaging and you learn something new. And I miss you all so much, and I can't wait to be gathering with you in person again. Bye.